A multi-million-dollar mansion on the cliffs of Monterey Bay. A tech mogul husband, Richard Sterling, whose life seems perfect. A beautiful pregnant wife, Amelia, carrying their future. But one stormy night, the perfection shatters. An argument, a shove, and Amelia lies broken at the bottom of a grand staircase, pushed out into the unforgiving night. Her husband locks the door, convinced his problems are solved. He wakes the next morning not to peace, but to the piercing wail of sirens. And then his phone rings. It's the hospital. What they tell him next is only the beginning of a nightmare. He created a nightmare where every secret has a price, and the truth is the most dangerous secret of all. The Sterling mansion wasn't a home. It was a statement. Perched on a dramatic cliff overlooking the churning Pacific in Monterey Bay, the structure of glass, steel, and pale limestone was a monument to Richard Sterling's ambition. To the outside world, Richard was the visionary CEO of Ethelred Technologies, a man who had spun complex data algorithms into a billion-dollar empire. He had the sharp jawline, the custom-tailored suits, and the easy charisma that made magazine covers and investor meetings swoon. And he had Amelia. Amelia Sterling née Reed was the soft heart in Richard's world of hard edges. Where he was calculating, she was compassionate. Where he saw assets and liabilities, she saw people. Her pregnancy, now a prominent and beautiful curve in her 8th month, was meant to be the final perfect piece of their idyllic life, the heir to the Sterling legacy. But for the past few months, the gilded cage had begun to feel like a real prison. The ocean view, once calming, now seemed menacing. The cavernous halls, once a symbol of their success, now echoed with a chilling silence. Richard had changed. The easy charisma had been replaced by a wire-taut tension. His nights were spent locked in his study, the low murmur of his voice on phone calls seeping under the door like a poison gas. He was drinking more, not the celebratory champagne of their early years, but the hard, desperate glug of scotch from a crystal tumbler. Tonight, the tension had finally snapped. A storm as turbulent as the one brewing inside their marriage raged outside, throwing sheets of rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows. "I just don't understand, Richard," Amelia said, her voice gentle but firm. She stood at the bottom of the grand, sweeping staircase that was the mansion's centerpiece. "The quarterly reports for the shareholders are due. You've always involved me in the summary. Now, you're shutting me out completely. Are we in some kind of trouble?" Richard stood at the top of the landing, looking down at her. His normally impeccable, silver-streaked hair was disheveled. His tie was loosened, and his eyes, usually a piercing blue, were clouded and dark. "Trouble, Amelia. You have no idea what real trouble is. You live in this palace, you wear designer clothes you want for nothing. Just handle the nursery decorations, and let me handle the business." The condescension in his voice was a physical blow. "My father was an accountant, Richard. I'm not some clueless doll. I have an MBA, in case you've forgotten. I know how to read a balance sheet. I also know that you've sold off nearly 20% of your personal stock portfolio in the last 6 weeks. That's not a power move. That's a panic move." He flinched. She had hit a nerve. He descended the stairs slowly, his hand gripping the polished oak banister. "You've been snooping in my private finances." "I've been paying attention to my family's finances." She counted, her hand instinctively going to her belly. "Our family. This baby's family. If something is wrong, we need to face it together." "There is nothing to face," he roared, his voice cracking. He was in front of her now, his scent a mixture of expensive cologne and cheap fear. "Ethelred is fine. Everything is fine." "Then look me in the eye and tell me that—" She whispered, her own eyes welling with tears. "Tell me you haven't been meeting with Cassandra Thorne outside of the office. Tell me you haven't been liquidating assets to cover something. Tell me the truth, Richard. For us. For him." She patted her stomach. The mention of Cassandra's name was the spark that ignited the inferno. Cassandra was his COO, a woman as sharp and merciless as her name. And Amelia suspected much more. Richard's face transformed. The mask of control shattered, revealing a twisted visage of pure, cornered desperation. "You know nothing," he seethed, his voice a low growl. "You and your pathetic little ideas of togetherness. You are a weight. This thing," he gestured venomously towards her stomach, "is just another complication I don't need." The cruelty of his words stole her breath. She recoiled, taking a step back towards the massive front doors. "Richard, I need you out of my way," he said, advancing on her. "I need to think. I need you to just go. Go where, Richard? It's a storm. I'm not going anywhere." Her defiance, born of shock and a primal need to protect her unborn child, only fueled at his rage. "I said go!" He didn't punch her. He didn't slap her. He did something far more dismissive, far more insulting. He shoved her hard in the chest with both hands. Not towards the stairs, but towards the front door. "Get out!" But they were too close to the bottom of the staircase. Her heel caught on the edge of the first marblesome step. Her center of gravity, already compromised by the pregnancy, was gone in an instant. Her arms flailed. Her eyes widened in sheer terror, and she tumbled backward. It was not a long fall, just 3 or 4 steps, but the sound was sickening. A wet final thud, as the back of her head connected with the unforgiving marble floor. Her body, which had been so full of life and defiance moments before, lay unnaturally still in a heap at the bottom of the stairs. Richard froze. The blood drained from his face. "Amelia," he whispered. No response. Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. This wasn't what he intended. Or was it? In the deepest, darkest recess of his mind, a voice whispered that a problem had been solved. He knelt, his hand trembling as he reached for her wrist. A pulse. Faint, but there. He should call 911. He should scream for help. He should do what any normal, loving husband would do. But Richard Sterling was no longer a loving husband. He was a survivor. And Amelia, lying unconscious on the floor, was a threat. She knew about the finances. She suspected about Cassandra. If she woke up, she would be a witness. His mind, sharpened by years of ruthless business decisions, went into overdrive. The staff had been given the night off, a small mercy. He looked from her still form to the rain-lashed front door. An idea, monstrous and brilliant in its simplicity, formed in his mind. He couldn't have her found inside the house. That would lead to questions, to an investigation. But outside, an accident. A tragic slip on the wet stone path. A fall. Plausible deniability. With a grunt of effort, he scooped her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected. He fumbled with the locks on the enormous door and pulled it open, the wind and rain roaring into the foyer. He carried her out onto the covered portico, the air cold on his skin. He didn't take her far. Just past the threshold, onto the top of the wide stone steps that led down to the circular driveway. He gently, almost reverently, laid her down on the cooled wet stone, arranging her body to look as if she had just stumbled out the door and fallen. He looked at her face, pale and peaceful in the dim light. A flicker of something remorse-love stirred in his chest, but he ruthlessly crushed it. He backed away, retreated inside the mansion, and pulled the great door shut. He slid the deadbolt home with a decisive thunk. He turned off the foyer lights, plunging the scene into darkness. He walked calmly back up the grand staircase, stepping over the spot where her head had hit, and went straight to the bar in his study. He poured a tumbler full of scotch and drank it in one long, burning swallow. He had pushed his pregnant wife out of their home, and as he stared out the window at the storm, he convinced himself he had just saved his life. He slept for the first time in months, a deep and dreamless sleep. Richard awoke to a world washed clean. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky of bruised purple and pale gold. For a blissful, disoriented moment, he felt a sense of peace. He stretched the expensive sheets cool against his skin. Then memory returned, hitting him like a physical blow. Amelia. He sat bolt upright in bed. Silence. The mansion was utterly deathly quiet. A wave of relief washed over him. It was done. Whatever happened next, he had controlled the narrative. It was a tragic accident. He would be the grieving husband. People would rally around him. He glanced at the bedside clock. 7:15 a.m. He should probably discover her soon. He began mentally rehearsing his performance, the panicked call to 911, the broken sobs, the desperate questions. That's when he heard it. It started as a faint, distant whine, almost indistinguishable from the seagulls crying over the bay. But it grew steadily, relentlessly louder. A siren, then another layering on top of the first. They were close, too close. A cold knot of dread tightened in his stomach. They weren't supposed to be here yet. No one should have found her. His mansion was isolated, the long driveway, shielded by a thick grove of cypress trees. Had a jogger seen her? A delivery truck. He threw on a silk robe and padded barefoot to the massive window of his bedroom, which overlooked the front of the estate. His heart hammered against his ribs. Down below at the edge of his property, where the driveway met the coastal road, red and blue lights flashed, painting the morning mist in strobing colors. An ambulance. A police cruiser. They found her at the gate. He thought a fresh wave of panic rising. How did she get all the way to the gate? He had left her on the front steps just outside the door. It was 100 yards to the gate. Had she woken up? Had she crawled desperate for help? The image of a wounded, bleeding Amelia dragging herself across the crushed stone driveway was 1,000 times more damning than the simple fall he had staged. His phone, sitting on the marble-topped nightstand, began to ring. The screen lit up with an unknown number. His hand trembled as he answered it. "Hello," he said, his voice a dry croak. "Is this Richard Sterling?" The voice on the other end was female, professional, and devoid of emotion. "Yes. Who is this Mr. Sterling?" "This is Nurse Espinosa from Monterey Peninsula Community Hospital. We need you to come to the emergency department immediately. It's regarding your wife, Amelia Sterling." The carefully constructed walls of his composure crumbled into dust. "My wife, is she okay?" What happened? He injected the perfect amount of panic into his voice. "There's been an incident, sir. A motorist found her unconscious near the entrance to your property. The doctors will need to speak with you in person. Please come as quickly as you can." The line went dead. He dressed in a frenzy, his mind racing. Found near the entrance. This changed everything. His narrative of her slipping on the wet steps just outside the door was useless now. How could he explain her being found so far away? How could he explain not knowing she was even missing? When he arrived at the hospital, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and anxiety, he was directed to a private waiting room. A man in a rumpled suit with tired eyes and a detective's badge clipped to his belt was waiting for him. "Mr. Sterling, I'm Detective Frank Miller, Monterey, PD." His handshake was firm, his gaze searching. "I'm sorry we have to meet under these circumstances." "My wife," Richard said, playing the distraught husband to perfection. "Where is she? Can I see her? Is the baby okay?" "The doctors are with her now. Dr. Chen will be out to speak with you shortly." Miller said, his tone neutral. "Can you tell me what happened last night, sir?" "Happened, I don't know," Richard stammered. "We had dinner. We might have had a small disagreement. Nothing serious. I went to my study to work late. Amelia said she was tired and was going to bed. I fell asleep in my office chair. When I woke up this morning, she was gone. I thought maybe she'd gone for an early walk. She does that sometimes." The lies flowed smoothly, a well-rehearsed script. Miller nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Richard's face. An early walk, in the middle of one of the worst storms we've seen this year. Without her phone or her purse, which we found on the kitchen counter. Richard felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. She's been a bit forgetful lately. The pregnancy, you know. Pregnancy brain, she calls it." "I see." Miller said, the words hanging in the air. "And you didn't hear anything?" "A woman falling, potentially crying out for help, just outside your home." "It's a big house, detective. And the storm. It was howling all night. I didn't hear a thing." Just then, a doctor in blue scrubs entered the room. He had a grim expression on his face. "Mr. Sterling, I'm Dr. Chen." Richard shot to his feet. "Doctor, how is she? How's the baby?" Dr. Chen's voice was grave. Amelia sustained a significant blunt force trauma to the back of her head. The fall caused a subdural hematoma. "We've performed surgery to relieve the pressure on her brain, but she's in a coma, Mr. Sterling. Her condition is critical." Richard sagged against the wall, a convincing performance of devastation. "A coma? Oh, God. What about the baby?" he choked out. "Miraculously, the baby's vitals are stable for now. The baby is acting as a sort of anchor, keeping her body fighting. We're monitoring them both around the clock. But I have to be honest with you, the next 48 hours are crucial." A coma. The word echoed in Richard's head. She couldn't talk. She couldn't tell them what happened. She couldn't point her finger at him. As horrific as it sounded, a coma was the best possible outcome for him. It bought him time. It turned his victim into a silent, tragic prop in his story. Detective Miller watched Richard's reaction, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Sterling, just one more thing. The paramedics noted something unusual. Your wife had significant abrasions on her knees and the palms of her hands, and there were traces of crushed gravel embedded in the fabric of her nightgown." Richard's blood ran cold. "It suggests," the detective continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "that wherever she fell initially, she didn't stay there. It suggests she was conscious. It suggests she crawled for a very long time trying to get help." Richard stared at the detective, his mind a blank slate of terror. The image of Amelia awake and in agony, dragging her pregnant body across 100 yards of sharp gravel in the dark, in the storm, while he slept peacefully in their bed, was a vision from hell. He had thought he had silenced her. He was wrong. The story of her survival etched into her broken body was just beginning to speak. The days that followed were a masterclass in deception. Richard Sterling played the role of the devoted, grief-stricken husband with unnerving precision. He spent hours at Amelia's bedside in the sterile, beeping quiet of the ICU, holding her limp hand, whispering apologies that were for his own ears, and speaking to the swell of her belly, a grotesque pantomime of a loving father-to-be. The hospital staff saw a man shattered by tragedy. The nurses would offer him coffee and words of comfort, their eyes filled with sympathy. Detective Frank Miller saw something else entirely. Miller was a man who believed in patterns, in the simple physics of crime and consequence. Things didn't just happen, and the story Richard Sterling was selling had too many holes. "He says he fell asleep in his study," Miller said to his partner, a young, eager detective named Ben Carter, as they stood before a whiteboard in their office. On the board were photos of the mansion, the gate, and Amelia in her hospital bed. He claims he didn't know she was missing until the hospital called. But who sleeps through their pregnant wife leaving the house in a hurricane and not coming back to bed? "The staff were all off," Carter added, tapping a pen on his notepad. "Convenient." "Very," Miller agreed. "I spoke to the housekeeper, Maria. She said Mr. Sterling gave them all a wellness bonus and told them to take the night off, enjoy the time with their families. Said he wanted a quiet night alone with Amelia. This was 2 days before the accident. It feels premeditated." Miller drew a circle around the photo of the mansion's front door. "Paramedics found her here," he said, drawing a long dotted line to a photo of the main gate. 100 yards away. The ME confirmed the abrasions on her hands, knees, and even her elbows. She crawled a long way. So the initial fall had to be somewhere else, somewhere closer to the house. The investigation led them back to the Sterling estate. Armed with a search warrant this time, Miller and his team descended on the property. Richard, feigning cooperation, let them in. "Whatever you need, detective. Anything to find out what happened to my wife." While the forensics team dusted for prints and searched for trace evidence, Miller walked the path from the front door to the gate. He then went inside, his eyes scanning every detail of the immaculate foyer. It was sterile, clean. Too clean. The housekeeper, Maria, had been told not to come in since the incident. So who had cleaned up? Miller's gaze fell upon the grand staircase. He ran a gloved hand along the polished banister. Then he knelt down, examining the marble floor at the base. Using a high-intensity flashlight, he scanned the surface, angling the beam to catch any imperfections. And then he saw it. Tucked deep into the seam, where the bottom step met the floor, almost invisible to the naked eye, was a single dark strand of hair. And next to it, a faint, almost imperceptible whoosh, a discoloration on the pristine white marble that suggested something had been hastily wiped away. "Bag this," he said quietly to a forensics officer, "and get a sample of that smudge. I want it run against every cleaning product in this house, and I want to know if it's masking anything else." Meanwhile, Richard's other world was beginning to implode. He was sitting in his gleaming office at Ethelred Technologies when his private line rang. It was Cassandra Thorne. Her voice was ice. "Richard, what the hell is going on?" "The press is starting to sniff around. Amelia Sterling in tragic accident. It's a distraction we don't need." "It's being handled," Richard snapped, rubbing his temples where a headache was blooming. "Is it because our primary lender called this morning? They're invoking the material adverse change clause in our credit agreement. They want to see our books, Not the cooked books we've been feeding the market, Richard, the real ones. Richard felt a familiar surge of cold panic. For over a year, he and Cassandra had been engaged in a massive fraud. Ethelred Technologies wasn't the powerhouse it appeared to be. It was a shell, its impressive revenue figures artificially inflated through a series of phantom contracts and dummy corporations. They had been robbing Peter to pay Paul, borrowing huge sums of money against a fictional valuation, all in a desperate attempt to fund a new project they hoped would actually make them solvent. They were weeks, maybe days, from total collapse. "Stall them," Richard ordered. "Tell them the records are with our auditors." "They want them by Friday," Cassandra said. "This is your mess, Richard. Your domestic drama is threatening to sink us both. You were supposed to keep Amelia quiet. A coma is not quiet. It's a spectacle." The call ended, leaving Richard shaking with rage and fear. Cassandra's loyalty, he realized, extended only as far as their mutual survival. If he went down, she would not hesitate to cut him loose. Back at the precinct, Detective Miller got a call from the lab. "You were right, Frank," the lab tech said. "The hair from the staircase is a match for Amelia Sterling, and that smudge, it's bleach, industrial strength, but underneath it we found microscopic traces of blood, type O negative, same as Amelia." Miller hung up the phone, a grim satisfaction on his face. The pieces were slotting into place. An argument, a fall on the stairs, a clean-up, a staged scene. His next stop was Amelia's wing of the mansion. It was a suite of rooms, a bedroom, a lavish bathroom, and a small sunlit office overlooking the ocean. Unlike the rest of the house, which felt cold and curated, this space felt lived in. Books on pregnancy and motherhood were stacked on a table. A half-finished knitted baby blanket lay in a basket. It was a room full of hope. Miller wasn't interested in the baby books. He was a methodical man. He started with her desk. He opened the drawers. The top one held stationery and pens. The second held personal correspondence. The third was locked. Carter, his partner, looked at him. "Want me to get the tools?" "Let's see," Miller said. He jiggled the handle. It was a simple lock. He took a paperclip from his pocket, straightened it, and went to work. Less than a minute later, he heard a soft click. He pulled the drawer open. Inside, there were no diaries or secret letters. There were files. Thick manila folders, each one meticulously labeled. Ethelred Q3 projections. Offshore holdings. Cyprus. Sterling personal asset liquidation. Richard hadn't been the only one looking at the finances. Amelia had been conducting her own deep secret investigation into the husband she thought she loved. And tucked at the very back of the drawer underneath a file labeled Forensic Accountant, Correspondence, was a small silver USB flash drive. Miller held it up. It felt heavy with secrets. "I think," he said to Carter, his voice low with anticipation, "we just found out what their last argument was really about." He had assumed Amelia was simply a victim. He now realized she was much, much more. She was the key. Detective Miller slid the silver USB drive into his laptop back at the precinct. The air in his cluttered office was thick with the smell of stale coffee and impending revelation. What he found wasn't just a smoking gun. It was a cannon. Amelia, the woman everyone dismissed as the gentle, naive wife, had been a meticulous and ruthless investigator. The drive contained spreadsheets that cross-referenced Ethelred's public statements with Richard's private dealings. It held copies of emails encrypted and password-protected between Richard and Cassandra Thorne, discussing the creative accounting needed to weather the storm. It detailed the network of offshore shell corporations used to hide debt and inflate revenue. Most damning of all was an audio file. Miller clicked play. Amelia's voice, clear and steady, filled the room. It was a voice memo dated the day before her fall. "Voice note for Evelyn Hayes," her recorded voice began. Evelyn Hayes. Miller recognized the name. One of the sharpest corporate lawyers in the state. "Evelyn, it's Amelia Sterling. I've compiled the final documents as we discussed. The fraud is more extensive than we imagined. Richard and Cassandra Thorne have leveraged the entire company against non-existent assets. They're planning to declare a massive loss after the next quarterly report, blame it on market volatility, and escape with millions through their offshore accounts, leaving the investors and employees with nothing. I have to give him one last chance. I'm going to confront him tonight. I'm going to ask him to come clean, to try and fix this before it destroys hundreds of lives. I know you advised against it, but he's my husband. He's the father of my child. I have to believe there's still some good in him. If I don't contact you by noon tomorrow, assume the worst and give this drive to the SEC and the district attorney. I love him, but I won't let him do this." The recording ended. Miller sat back, stunned. This changed the entire motive. The argument wasn't just a domestic subtort that got out of hand. It was a confrontation. Amelia hadn't been asking questions. She had been delivering an ultimatum. Richard's shove wasn't a moment of lost temper. It was a desperate, violent act to silence the whistleblower who was about to detonate his entire world. This wasn't just domestic assault anymore. This was attempted murder. The new evidence painted Richard's hospital bedside vigil in a sinister new light. He wasn't waiting for his wife to wake up. He was waiting for her to die. Her coma was a temporary reprieve, a stay of execution for his lies. Richard, meanwhile, was oblivious to this discovery. His focus was on managing the two fronts of his war, the hospital and his business. At the hospital, he continued his charade reading to Amelia from novels he knew she hated the sound of his voice, a constant droning presence in the room. He felt a perverse sense of control, believing her unconscious mind was his to mold. But his control at Ethelred was slipping fast. Cassandra Thorne, ever the survivor, was beginning to distance herself. She started holding meetings he wasn't invited to. She changed key passwords on their shared servers. She was building a firewall around herself, preparing to sacrifice him to save her own skin. In a tense, whispered phone call, she made her position clear. "This is spiraling, Richard. The police have been to the office. They took files. Your personal drama has become a corporate liability. You're a sinking ship, and I'm not going down with you." "We built this together, Cassie," he hissed into the phone. "No," she replied coldly. "You built a house of cards, Richard. I just played the hand you dealt me. From now on, you're on your own." The call felt like a nail being hammered into his coffin. Miller's investigation gained a powerful new ally in the form of Amelia's older brother, Daniel Reed, a rugged, no-nonsense architect from Colorado. Daniel arrived at the hospital like a force of nature. He was everything Richard wasn't: warm, genuine, and fiercely protective. He looked at Richard with an undisguised contempt that cut through all the pretense. "I never trusted you," Daniel said to Richard in the hospital corridor, his voice low and menacing. "Amelia called me the day it happened. She sounded scared. She said you were like a cornered animal. She said she was going to talk to you that night to try and pull you back from the ledge. What did you do to her, you son of a bitch?" Richard recoiled, sputtering denials. "It was an accident. She fell." Daniel wasn't buying it. He became a permanent fixture at the hospital, a guardian at his sister's bedside, effectively blocking Richard's unsupervised access. He spoke to Miller, filling in the gaps. "Amelia was brilliant. Daniel told the detective, his eyes full of a pained pride. She saw the world in numbers, in patterns. She fell for Richard's charm, but she wasn't blind. She started noticing discrepancies months ago. Small things at first, but Amelia doesn't ignore small things. She follows the thread. She told me she was building a case, an escape plan. She called it, just in case. Miller showed Daniel the files from the locked drawer, and Daniel nodded grimly. That's her. Methodical. Careful. She wanted to save the company, not just herself. She still believed in the man she married. The case against Richard was now a fortress. They had motive, the fraud means, the push and opportunity, the staged scene. They had physical evidence from the staircase and a mountain of digital evidence from Amelia's own hand. The district attorney was confident. They were ready to move to arrest Richard Sterling and charge him with attempted murder and a litany of financial crimes. They planned to make the arrest the following morning. Miller wanted to do it quietly, away from the hospital, to preserve some dignity for the family. But that night, as the machines in the ICU kept their steady, rhythmic watch, something happened that no one, least of all Richard Sterling, could have ever predicted. A nurse was doing her routine checks, adjusting Amelia's pillows, when she noticed a flicker of a movement. Amelia's eyelids. The nurse called for Dr. Chen, her voice urgent. As the doctor rushed in, Amelia's eyes slowly, groggily opened. She blinked, trying to focus on the concerned faces staring down at her. She tried to speak, her throat dry and unused. "Where?" she whispered, her voice a faint rasp. "Where is Richard? Is my husband here?" Amelia was awake. The silent witness was about to find her voice. For Richard, time had just run out. The news that Amelia was awake hit the hospital like a shockwave. For Daniel Reed, it was a moment of pure, unadulterated joy. For Detective Miller, it was the moment of truth. For Richard Sterling, it was a death knell. He received the call from Dr. Chen early the next morning, just as he was preparing his coffee, and the ceramic mug slipped from his hand, shattering on the Italian tile floor. "She's awake, is she? Can she talk? She's weak, but she's speaking," Dr. Chen said, his voice cautious. "She's asking for you, Mr. Sterling. The team thinks seeing a familiar face might help with her orientation. But we need to keep her calm. No stress." No stress. The irony was so bitter it tasted like acid. His entire existence was now the single greatest source of stress in her life. When Richard arrived at the hospital, he found Miller and Daniel already standing outside her room. Daniel's arms were crossed, his body a solid wall of defiance. Miller's expression was professionally blank, but his eyes were sharp, watching Richard's every move. "We need to talk to her first, Sterling," Daniel growled. "I'm her husband." Richard shot back, his voice laced with manufactured authority. "The doctor said she's asking for me." "Mr. Sterling," Miller interjected calmly, "your wife has been through a major trauma. We need to proceed carefully. Dr. Chen is with her now, assessing her cognitive state. We'll all go in when he gives the okay." Richard was forced to wait, pacing the hallway like a caged tiger. This was it. The final act. Would she remember? Would she point at him and scream, "He did this! He pushed me!" His mind raced through a dozen frantic, useless escape plans. After what felt like an eternity, Dr. Chen emerged. His face was perplexed. "You can go in," he said, looking from Richard to Daniel to Miller. "But I need to prepare you for something. We've just completed a preliminary cognitive screening. Amelia is suffering from post-traumatic amnesia, specifically retrograde amnesia." "What does that mean?" Daniel asked, his voice tight with anxiety. It means she has no memory of the event itself, the fall, Dr. Chen explained. In fact, her memory seems to have gaps covering the last several months. She remembers being pregnant. She remembers her life with Mr. Sterling, but she has no recollection of her suspicions or the confrontation. The last clear thing she seems to remember is planning the baby shower a few months ago. A slow, audacious sense of hope began to dawn in Richard's mind. It was a miracle. A dark, twisted, unbelievable miracle. The one piece of evidence he couldn't erase her memory had erased itself. He schooled his features into a mask of deep concern and entered the room. Amelia was propped up by pillows, looking pale and fragile, an IV line in her arm, and monitors beeping softly beside her. But her eyes were open. They were her eyes. When they landed on him, they filled not with fear or accusation, but with love and relief. "Richard," she whispered, a weak smile gracing her lips. She reached a trembling hand towards him. He rushed to her side, taking her hand in both of his. He kissed it, letting a single, perfectly timed tear roll down his cheek. "Oh, Amelia, my love, you're back. You're back." Daniel and Detective Miller watched from the doorway, observing the scene with a mixture of disgust and helplessness. What happened?" Amelia asked, her voice raspy. "I feel so foggy. The doctor said I fell." Richard looked into her trusting, confused eyes. This was his chance. He could rewrite history. He could paint himself as the hero of this tragedy, not the villain. "You did, my love," he said, his voice thick with fake emotion. "It was that terrible storm. You must have gone to step outside for a moment. The steps were so slick with rain. I found you. I thought I'd lost you." He buried his face in her hand, his shoulders shaking with feigned sobs. Amelia's eyes filled with tears of sympathy for him. She gently stroked his hair. "Oh, Richard, poor you. It must have been awful." "It doesn't matter," he said, looking up his face, a portrait of devotion. "All that matters is you're awake. You and our little boy." He placed his other hand on her belly. "He's been a fighter, just like his mother." From the doorway, Miller felt a surge of cold fury. Richard was a viper poisoning Amelia's mind with lies while she was at her most vulnerable. The detective knew the truth. He had the USB drive. He had the forensic evidence. He had Daniel's testimony. But the one thing he didn't have was the victim's own account. Without her memory, any prosecution would be an uphill battle. A slick defense attorney would paint Amelia as a confused, unreliable witness, her mind damaged by the fall. They would argue the USB drive was just her paranoid fantasy, the ramblings of a hormonal pregnant woman. Daniel couldn't stand it. He stepped forward. "Ames," he said softly, using his childhood nickname for her. "He's not telling you the whole story." Amelia looked towards her brother, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Daniel, what are you talking about?" "Amelia," Richard said, cutting in sharply, his voice full of protective concern. "Your brother is just upset. We've all been under a lot of strain. The doctor said you need to rest, no stress." He shot a venomous glare at Daniel, a clear warning. "Don't you dare." The battle lines were drawn. It was no longer a question of evidence, but of influence. It was Richard's carefully crafted fiction versus a truth Amelia couldn't remember. He had her trapped, not in a coma, but in a fog, and he would do everything in his power to keep her there to rebuild their gilded cage around her memory by memory. Detective Miller knew he had to find a way to cut through that fog before Richard's lies solidified into her new reality. The race was on, not just to arrest a criminal, but to rescue Amelia's mind from the man who had tried to destroy her body. The days turned into a week. Amelia's physical recovery was remarkably swift. The doctors credited her resilience and the strong, steady heartbeat of the baby within her. But her mind remained a fractured landscape. The past few months were a blank, a chapter ripped from her life story. Richard exploited this void with chilling efficiency. He was a constant, doting presence. He brought her flowers, read her stories, and spoon-fed her a curated version of their recent past. He painted a picture of a perfect marriage of shared excitement for their sore child of a life untroubled by financial woes or infidelity. He explained away her brother's hostility as misplaced grief and stress. "Daniel just needs someone to blame," Richard would say softly, stroking her hair. "It's easier for him to be angry at me than to accept this was just a horrible random accident." Amelia, adrift in her sea of amnesia, clung to Richard's words like a life raft. His narrative was the only one that made sense of the chaos, and yet there were whispers. They weren't memories, not yet. They were echoes, feelings, moments of profound and unsettling dissonance. Sometimes when Richard would lean in to kiss her, she would feel an involuntary flinch, a ghost of fear she couldn't explain. When he used a certain tone of voice, sharp, dismissive, a cold dread would prickle her skin. But the reason for it remained tantalizingly out of reach. Daniel and Detective Miller saw the window of opportunity closing. They brought in Evelyn Hayes, the sharp-witted lawyer Amelia had hired. The three of them sat with Amelia in her room one afternoon, while Richard was away, supposedly handling a business emergency he had invented to maintain his facade. "Amelia," Evelyn began, her voice calm and compassionate. "I know this is incredibly difficult to hear, but the man you hired me to help you leave is currently sitting by your bedside, pretending to be your savior." Amelia looked distressed. "Leave him? Why would I leave Richard? We're in love. We're having a baby." "Because he was committing massive financial fraud," Miller stated bluntly, deciding that gentle tactics were failing. "And you discovered it. You gathered the proof." He held up the silver USB drive. "This is yours, Amelia. You compiled all of this. You were going to expose him." She stared at the drive, a flicker of something recognition confusion in her eyes. She took it, her fingers turning it over and over. It felt familiar, but the context was gone. "This doesn't make any sense," she said, her voice trembling. "Richard is a good man. A good man doesn't push his pregnant wife down the stairs and leave her outside in a storm to die." Daniel said, his voice raw with pain. The accusation hung in the air, brutal and direct. Amelia recoiled, as if struck. "He would never. He told me I slipped on the wet steps. He found me, he saved me." "That's the story he wants you to believe," Miller said, leaning forward. "Amelia, we have forensic evidence of your blood and hair at the bottom of the indoor staircase. We have proof he cleaned the scene with bleach. We have this drive your voice memo stating your intention to confront him that night." They played the audio file for her. She listened to her own voice, so strong, so determined, detailing a life of lies she couldn't remember living. The sound of her own words, alien and yet intimately familiar, brought tears to her eyes. She was listening to a ghost, a version of herself she no longer knew. I don't remember any of this," She whispered, her head in her hands. I want to believe you, I do. But in my heart, I remember loving him. The cognitive dissonance was tearing her apart. Her logical mind was being presented with irrefutable evidence, but her emotional memory, the only part of her recent past that felt real, told a completely different story. That evening, Richard returned, his face a mask of weary concern. Long day. He sighed, kissing her forehead. She didn't flinch this time, but she was different, quieter, more watchful. Later, as a nurse was helping her with some gentle physical therapy, walking slowly around the room, Amelia felt a wave of dizziness. She gripped the nurse's arm, steadying herself. It's okay, dear, the nurse said kindly. Just a bit of a head rush. Your body's still healing. But it wasn't just dizziness. It was a flash, a sliver of memory, sharp and terrifying. The scent of rain and scotch, the feeling of being backed against something hard, a voice low and seething with rage. It was gone as quickly as it came, leaving her breathless and shaking. It wasn't a full memory, just a sensory snapshot. But it was real, and it did not feel like love. The next day, Daniel brought a photo album from Amelia's childhood home. They sat together, flipping through pictures of birthdays and family vacations. It was a relief to anchor herself in memories that were solid, unquestionable. They laughed at pictures of a gap-toothed Amelia and a gangly teenage Daniel. Then they came to a photo from a few years ago. It was from a family ski trip. Richard was in the picture, standing with his arm around Amelia. He was smiling for the camera, but his other hand was gripping her arm, his knuckles white. Daniel was standing nearby, looking at Richard with an expression of intense dislike. I remember that day, Daniel said quietly. He'd been awful to you all morning, belittling you on the slopes because you weren't as fast as him. I told him to back off. He just laughed and said, "You know nothing about pressure, Danny boy. You play with buildings, I build empires." You know nothing about pressure. The phrase hit Amelia like a lightning bolt. Suddenly, the fog in her mind didn't just thin, it tore apart. The whispers became a roar. The sensory snapshot from the day before connected to a new image, a new sound. Richard's face twisted and ugly inches from her own, his voice venomous. You and your pathetic little ideas of togetherness, you are a weight. Her own voice pleading. Tell me the truth, Richard. For us, for him. His hand gesturing dismissively, cruelly at her pregnant belly. This thing is just another complication I don't need. And then the final horrifying piece of the puzzle slotted into place. His roar. Get out! The shove. Not a slip, not an accident. A deliberate, violent push. The feeling of her balance giving way, the sickening lurch in her stomach, the brief, terrifying moment of weightlessness before the world exploded into pain and darkness. It was all there. It all came flooding back. She gasped, dropping the photo album. The color drained from her face. Ames, Daniel asked, alarmed. What is it? Are you okay? She looked at her brother, her eyes wide with a terror that was fresh and new, but also ancient and remembered. I remember, she whispered, her voice shaking with the force of the revelation. Oh God, Daniel, I remember everything. The transformation in Amelia was absolute. The confused, fragile patient was gone, replaced by a woman of cold, crystalline fury. The amnesia had been a shield, and now that it was shattered, all the pain, betrayal, and terror she had been suppressing for weeks came rushing to the surface. But beneath it was the steely resolve her own voice memo had hinted at the strength of the woman who had been willing to confront a monster. "Get Detective Miller," she told Daniel, her voice steady, despite the storm raging inside her. "And get Evelyn. But don't let Richard know." "Not yet. I want everything in place." For 2 days, Amelia played the part Richard had written for her. She continued to be the loving, recovering wife. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. Every time he touched her, she had to fight the urge to recoil. Every time he spoke of their beautiful future, bile rose in her throat. She was an actor now, too, and her performance had to be perfect. Behind the scenes, her room became a command center. Evelyn Hayes drew up legal documents, securing control of Amelia's assets and preparing a restraining order. Detective Miller prepared his arrest warrant, now armed with his star witness, who was lucid, credible, and burning with the need for justice. They decided the confrontation would happen in the one place Richard still felt in control, her hospital room. It would be the scene of his final, stunning defeat. The day arrived. Richard came in as usual, carrying a bouquet of overpriced lilies, a smug, proprietary smile on his face. "For my beautiful survivor," he said, placing them on her bedside table. Daniel was there, standing quietly in the corner. Richard barely acknowledged him. "I have some good news, my love," Richard said, taking her hand. His felt clammy. "I've managed to stabilize things at Ethelred. Just a temporary cash flow problem. Everything is going to be fine. We're going to be fine." Amelia looked at his handsome, lying face. She saw the man she had once loved, and she mourned him, but she also saw the monster he had become. "That's good, Richard," she said, her voice even. "But we need to talk about that night." Richard's smile tightened. "Amelia, we've been over this. It was a tragic accident. There's no need to upset yourself." "No," she said, pulling her hand from his. "I don't think it was an accident. I remember, Richard. I remember the argument." The blood drained from Richard's face. He shot a panicked look at Daniel. "What has he been telling you, Daniel? I swear, if you've been filling her head with nonsense." "He didn't have to," Amelia said, her voice rising in strength. "You did. I remember you yelling. I remember you were angry that I knew about the money, that I knew about Cassandra." Richard began to stammer, his carefully constructed composure cracking. "You're confused, Amelia. The fall, it scrambled your memory." "My memory is perfectly clear," she said, sitting up straighter. "You said I was a weight. You pointed at our baby and called him a complication. And then you shoved me." At that moment, the door to the room opened. Detective Miller and his partner Ben Carter stepped inside. Evelyn Hayes followed a folder of documents in her hand. Richard spun around, his eyes wide with the terror of a trapped animal. "What is this? You can't be here. This is a private hospital room." "Richard Sterling." Detective Miller said, his voice ringing with authority. "You are under arrest for the attempted murder of Amelia Sterling." "You have no proof," Richard shrieked, his facade completely disintegrating. "It's her word against mine." "She's a confused, hysterical woman." "We have more than her word," Miller said calmly. "We have the blood evidence you tried to bleach from the floor. We have the financial records she so carefully compiled. We have your accomplice Cassandra Thorne, who gave a full confession an hour ago in exchange for a deal. She confirmed everything. She said you called her that night after you pushed Amelia and told her you had handled the problem. It was the final devastating blow." Richard stared at Amelia, his face a mask of disbelief and pure hatred. The love he had feigned was gone, replaced by the raw fury of the man she remembered from that night. "You," he seethed, pointing a shaking finger at her. "You did this. You were supposed to be my wife. You were supposed to stand by me. I gave you everything. You gave me a cage," Amelia replied, her voice ringing with newfound power. "You gave me lies. You tried to take my life and the life of my son. But you failed. Your empire is gone, Richard. Your web of deceit is torn, and you are going to prison for a very, very long time." As Carter slapped handcuffs on Richard's wrists and read him his rights, he didn't look at the police. He kept his venomous gaze locked on Amelia, but she did not look away. She met his stare, her eyes clear and strong. She was no longer his victim. She was the architect of his downfall. 6 weeks later, Amelia gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby boy. She named him Daniel, after the brother who had stood by her. The Sterling mansion and all of Richard's blood money assets were seized. In the ensuing trials, Richard was found guilty of attempted murder and a host of financial crimes, sentenced to life in prison. Cassandra Thorne received a lesser sentence for her cooperation. Amelia, with Evelyn Hayes's help, used her premarital assets and a portion of the restitution funds to start over. She moved back to Colorado to be near her brother, buying a modest, comfortable house with a big yard. She had survived the fall, the coma, the gaslighting, and the lies. She had emerged from the wreckage not as the fragile wife of a tycoon, but as a formidable woman in her own right. Sometimes, holding her son in the quiet of the night, she would look out at the Rocky Mountains, so different from the treacherous cliffs of Monterey. She had faced the storm and the monster within it, and she had won. Her life was not the gilded fantasy she had once thought she wanted, but something far more valuable. It was real, it was honest, and it was hers. Amelia Sterling's story is a harrowing journey from a gilded cage to true freedom. It's a powerful reminder that the most dangerous secrets often hide behind the most perfect facades, and that true strength isn't about the wealth you have, but the truth you're willing to fight for. She was pushed, but she refused to be broken. Her awakening was not just from a coma, but from a life built on lies. What did you think of the final twist when her memory returned? Was Richard's downfall everything you hoped it would be? If Amelia's story of resilience and survival moved you, please let us know in the comments below. Your engagement helps our channel grow and allows us to bring more incredible true-life dramas to you. Don't forget to hit that like button if you are on the edge of your seat. Share this video with someone who loves a story of justice, and most importantly, subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss our next upload. Thank you for watching.